think we don't yet know the shape and form of the ultimate products. One just obvious historical analogy is, the personal computer from sort of invention in 1975 through to, basically 1992 was a text prompt system. Right. 17 years in, the whole industry took a left turn into GUIs and never looked back. And then, by the way, 5 years after that, the industry took a left turn into web browsers and never looked back, right? And, look, I'm sure there will be chatbots 20 years from now, but I'm pretty confident that both the current chatbot companies and many new companies are going to figure out many kinds of user experiences that are radically different that we don't even know yet.
Please join me in welcoming Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz with general partner Erik Torenberg.
Follow me into a solo, get in the flow, and you can picture like a photo. Music makes mellow, maintains to make melodies for MCs, motivates to break some everlasting.
Thank you for the rock hymn. Who did that? Yeah.
Ben picked the music.
Marc, there's been a lot of talk lately about the limitations of LLMs, that they can't do true invention of, say, new science, that they can't do true creative genius, that it's just combining or packaging. You have thoughts here. What say you?
Yeah, so for me, so you get all these questions, and they usually come in either, sort of are language models intelligent in the sense of like, can they actually process information and have sort of conceptual breakthroughs the way that people can, and then there's our language models or video models creative. Can they create new art, actually have genuine creative breakthroughs? And of course, my answer to both of those is, well, can people do those things? I think there's two questions there, which is like, okay, even if some people are quote unquote intelligent, as in having original conceptual breakthroughs and not just, let's just say, regurgitating the training set or following scripts, what percentage of people can actually do that? And I say I've only met a few. Some of them are here in the room, but not that many. Most people never do. And then creativity. I mean, how many people are actually genuinely creative, right? And so you kind of point to a Beethoven or a Van Gogh or something like that. And you're like, okay, that's creativity. And yeah, that's creativity. And then how many Beethovens and Van Goghs are there? Obviously, not very many. So one is just like, okay, like if these things clear the bar of 99.99% of humanity, then that's pretty interesting just in and of itself. But then you dig into it further, and you're like, okay, like how many actual real conceptual breakthroughs have there ever been actually ever in human history, as compared to sort of remixing ideas? Like if you look at the history of technology, it's almost always the case that the big breakthroughs are the result of, usually at least 40 years of sort of work ahead of time, 4 decades. Right, in fact, language models themselves are the culmination of 8 decades, right, of previous work. And so there's remixing. And then in the arts, it's the exact same thing, novels and music and everything. Like, there are clearly creative leaps, but, there's just tremendous amounts of influence that come in from people who came before. And even if you think about like somebody with the creativity of a Beethoven, like there was a lot of Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and in the composers that came before. And so there's just tremendous amounts of remixing and combination. And so it's got a little bit of an angel's dancing on the head of a pin question, which is like if you can get within I don't know 0.01% of kind of world beating generational creativity and intelligence, like you're probably all the way there. So emotionally, I want to like hold out hope that there is still something special about human creativity, and I certainly believe that, and I very much want to believe that. But I don't know. When I use these things, I'm like, wow, they seem to be awfully smart and awfully creative. So I'm pretty convinced that they're going to clear the bar.
Yeah. I think that seems to be a common theme in your analysis when people talk about the limitations of LMs. Can they do transfer learning or just learning in general? You seem to ask, can people do that?
Yes, can people do these things? Well, it's like lateral thinking, right? So it's like reasoning in or out of distribution, right? And so it's like, okay, I know a lot of people who are very good at reasoning inside distribution. How many people do I actually know who are good at reasoning outside of distribution and doing transfer learning? And the answer is like, I know a handful. Like I know a few people where whenever you ask them a question, you get an extremely original answer, and usually that answer involves bringing in some idea from some adjacent space and basically being able to bridge domains. And so, you'll ask them a question about, I don't know, finance, and they'll bring you an answer from psychology, or you ask them a question about psychology, and they'll bring you an answer from biology, right, or whatever it is. And so I know, I don't know, sitting here today, I probably know 3 people who can do that reliably. Out of the, I've got 10,000 in my address book, and so 3 out of 10,000 is not that high a percentage. By the way, I find this very encouraging. Like immediately the mood in the room has gone completely to hell. I find this very encouraging because look at what humanity has been able to build, right, despite all of our limitations. right? And look at all the creativity that we've been able to exhibit, and all the amazing art, and all the amazing movies, and all the amazing novels, and all the amazing technical inventions and scientific breakthroughs. And so we've been able to do, everything we've been able to do with the limitations that we have. And so, I think that, do you need to get to the thing where you are 100% positive that's actually doing, original thinking? Yeah, I don't think so. I think it'd be great if you did, and I think ultimately we'll probably conclude that that's what's happening. But it's not necessary. It's not even necessary for just tremendous amounts of improvement.
Ben, we were just celebrating some hip hop legends at your Paid in Full event last week, and so you think a lot about creative genius. How do you think about this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I agree with Mark that it's whatever it is, it's very useful, even if it isn't all the way that level. I think that there's something about the actual real-time human experience that humans are very into, at least in art, where with the current state of the technology, kind of the pre-training doesn't have quite the right data to get to what you really want to see, but it's pretty good. It is. Pretty
how many true conceptual? So one of Ben's nonprofit activities is something called the Paid in Full Foundation, which is honoring and actually providing essentially a pension for for sort of the great innovators in rap and hip hop. And so he knows and has many of. We were just at the event, and he has many of the kind of leading lights of that field for the last 50 years. Perform, and it's really fun to meet them and talk to them. But how many people in that entire field over the course of the last 50 years would you classify as a true conceptual innovator?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It depends how broadly you define it, but there were several of them there on Saturday. So
Dr. Dre,
I think, Rakim, you'd certainly put in that category. Dr. Dre, you'd certainly put in that category. George Clinton, you'd certainly put in that category. In a narrower sense, Cool G Rap certainly had a new idea. But, it depends. A fundamental kind of musical breakthrough, you probably just say Rakim and George Clinton.
Are they excited?
So 2 out of.
Well, I mean, those are the guys who were there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's a tiny percentage. Tiny.
We had Jared at the fireside last night with Jared Leto. He was talking about how many people in Hollywood are really scared or against this. What's happening here? What do you see in when you talk to the Dr. Dre's, the Nas, the Kanye's? Are they excited? Are they using it? Are they?
Yeah, no. So everybody who I speak to, there are definitely people who are scared in music, but there are a lot of people who are very, very interested in it, and particularly the hip hop guys are interested because. It's almost like a replay of what they did, right? They just took other music and they kind of built new music out of it. And I think that, AI is a fantastic creative tool for them. It way opens up the palette. And then for, a lot of what hip hop is it's kind of telling a very specific story of a specific time and place, which having intimate knowledge and being trained just on that thing is actually an advantage as opposed to being a generally smart music model.
People also use the same logic of, hey, whatever is more intelligent will rule whatever is less intelligent. And Mark, you recently...
not said by anybody who owns a cat.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, you recently tweeted, a supreme shape rotator can only rotate shapes, but a supreme word cell can rotate shape rotators. And also, someone's clapping here. And also, high IQ experts work for mid IQ generalists. What means?
Yeah, what means? So the PhDs all work for MBAs, right? So it's okay. So well, I just you just take it up a level. It's just when you look at the world today, do you think we're being ruled by the smart ones? Right? Is that your big conclusion from current events, current affairs? right? Like, okay, we put the geniuses in charge.
You
like,
mean Kamala and Trump aren't the best?
well, let's not even be specific towards the U.S. Let's just look all over the world. Yeah, and so like it's just like there's this thing. So I think two things are true. One is we probably all kind of underrate the importance of intelligence, and actually there's a whole kind of backstory here of like intelligence actually turns out to be this like incredibly inflammatory, kind of topic for lots of reasons over the last 100 years, which we could talk about in great detail. But like even just the very idea that like some people are smarter than other people, just like really freaks people out, and people don't like to talk about it. We really struggle with that as a society, and so like and then it is true that intelligence is like in humans, intelligence is correlated to almost every kind of positive life outcome, right? And so intelligence, generally in the social sciences, what they'll tell you is what they call fluid intelligence, or the G factor, or IQ, is sort of 0.4 correlated to basically everything. And so it has 0.4 correlation to like educational outcomes and like professional outcomes and income, and by the way also like life satisfaction, and by the way nonviolence, being able to solve problems without physical violence and so forth. And so like on the one hand, like we probably all underrate intelligence. On the other hand, the people who are in the fields that involve intelligence probably overrate intelligence. And you might even coin a term like maybe like intelligence supremacist or something like that, where it's just like, oh, like intelligence is very important, and so therefore maybe it's like the most important thing or the only thing. But then you look at reality and you're like, okay, that's clearly not the case.
Yeah, it's still only 0.4, right? Yeah.
Well, so to start with, it's only 0.4, and in the social sciences, 0.4 is a giant correlation factor, right? Like most things where you can correlate, whether it's genes or observed behavior or whatever, to anything in the social sciences, the correlations are much smaller than that. So 0.4 is tiny, but it's still only 0.4. So even if you're like a full-on, even if you're like a full-on genetic determinist and you're just like genetic IQ just like drives all these outcomes, like it still doesn't explain 0.6 of the correlation, and so that leaves it. But that's just on the individual level. Then you just look at the collective level. Well, you just look at the collective level, and it's like a famous observation is you take any group of people, you put them in a mob, and the mob is dumber, right, than the average. And you put a bunch of smart people in a mob, and they definitely turn dumber. Like, and you see that all the time, right? And so you put people in groups, and they behave very differently. And then you create these questions around like who's in charge, whether who's in charge at a company or who's in charge of a country, and like it's whatever the filtration process, it's clearly not. It's certainly not only on IQ, and it may not even be primarily on IQ. And so therefore, it's just like this assumption that you kind of hear in some of the AI circles, which is like inevitably the smart, kind of thing is going to govern the dumb thing. Like I just think that's like very easily, it's just sort of very easily and obviously falsified. Like intelligence isn't sufficient, and then you just convey it. We're all in this room lucky enough to know a lot of smart people, and you just kind of observe smart people, and like some smart people, really figure out how to have their stuff together and become very successful, and a lot of smart people never do. And so there must be, there obviously are, and there in fact must be many other factors that have to do with success, and have to do with like who's in charge than just raw intelligence.
It begs the follow-up question of what are some examples of what that might be, skills sort of outside of intelligence, and more specifically, why couldn't AI systems, learn them?
Yeah, so Ben, like what other than intelligence, what in your experience determines, for example, success in leadership or in entrepreneurship or in solving complex problems or organizing people?
Yeah, well, there are many things. Like a lot of it is being able to have a confrontation in the correct way, and there's some intelligence in that, but a lot of it is just really understanding who you're talking to. Being able to interpret everything about how they're thinking about it, and just kind of generally seeing decisions through the eyes of the people working in the company, not through your eyes, is a skill that you develop by talking to people all the time, understanding what they're saying, so forth, these kinds of things. And it's just, it's certainly not an IQ thing, and not that, like I could imagine an AI training on any individual and like figuring it all out and knowing what to say and so forth. But then you also need that integrated with, like whatever the business ought to be doing. So you're not trying to do what's popular, you're trying to get people to do what's correct even if they don't like it. And that's a lot of management. So it's not a problem anybody's working on AI currently, but maybe they will.
It's some combination of like courage,
Yeah.
Some combination of motivation, some combination of emotional understanding, theory of mind.
Yeah, what do people want? Like, marry to, what needs to be done, and then like, how talented are they? Like, which ones can you afford? Like, if they jump out the window, it's fine. Which ones not fine? This kind of thing. There's a lot of like weird subtleties to it, and it's very situational. I think the hardest thing about it, and why management books are so bad, is because it's situational. Like your company, your product, your people, your org chart is very, very different than, here are the 5 steps to building a strategy. It's like, well, that's the most useless fucking thing I ever read because it has nothing to do with you.
So one of the interesting things on this, the concept of theory of mind is really important, right? So theory of mind is, can you in your head model what's happening in the other person's head, right? And you would think that maybe maybe obviously people who are smarter should be better at that. It turns out that may not be true, and there's the reason to believe that that's not true, which is as follows. So the U.S. military was the early adopter and has continued to be sort of the leading adopter in U.S. society of actually IQ testing, and they basically launder it through something called the ASVAB, which is they call vocational aptitude battery test, but it's basically it's essentially an IQ test, and so they still use basically explicit IQ tests, and they slot people into different specialties and roles, in part with according to IQ, including into leadership roles, and so they know what everybody's IQ is, and they kind of organize around that. And one of the things that they found over the years is if the leader is more than one standard deviation of IQ away from the followers, it's a real problem, and that's true in both directions, right? If the leader is not smart enough to be able to manage to be able to for somebody who is less smart to model the mental behavior of somebody who's more smart is of course inherently very challenging and maybe impossible. But it turns out the reverse is also true, which is if the leader is 2 standard deviations above the norm of the organization that he's running, he also loses theory of mind, right? It's actually very hard for very smart people to model the internal thought processes of even moderately smart people. And so there's actually a real need to have a level of connection there that's not just right, and therefore by inference, if you had a person or a machine that had 1,000 IQ or something, like it may just be, it would be so alien, its understanding of reality would be so alien to the people or the things that it was managing that it wouldn't even be able to connect in any sort of realistic way. So again, this is a very good argument that the world is going to be far from organized by IQ for centuries to come.
Yeah, and Zuckerberg had a great line, which is, intelligence is not life. And life has a lot of dimensionality to it that is independent of intelligence. I think that, if you spend all your time working on intelligence, you lose track of that.
We sometimes say about some specific people that they're too smart to properly model or they sort of assume too much rationality on other people, or they just overthink things or over-rationalize them. Just to your point that it's not everything. Yeah. People seldom do what's in their best interest, I should say. Yeah.
I also suspect this kind of gets more into the biology side of things. There's more and more scientific evidence that basically also that like human cognition or human, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, self-awareness, information processing, decision-making sort of experience is not purely a brain. Like, the sort of famous mind-body dualism is just not correct. Like, and again, this is an argument against sort of IQ supremacism or intelligence supremacism. It's not, we human beings didn't experience existence just through the rational thought, and specifically not through just the rational thought of the brain, but rather it's a whole body experience, right? And there's aspects of our nervous system, and there's aspects of everything from our gut biome to smells, to the olfactory senses, and hormones, and like all kinds of like biochemical kind of aspects to life. If you just kind of track the research, I suspect we're going to find as human cognition as a full body experience, much more than people thought, and so therefore to actually. And this is one of the kind of big fundamental challenges in the AI field right now, which is the form of AI that we have working is the fully mind-body dual version of it, which is it's just a disembodied, like a disembodied brain. The robotics revolution for sure is coming. When that happens, when we put AI in physical objects that move around the world, you're going to be able to get closer to having that kind of integrated intellectual physical experience. You're going to have sensors in the robots that are going to be able to gather a lot more real world data, and so maybe you can start to actually think about synthesizing a more advanced model of cognition, and maybe we're going to actually discover more both about how the human version of that works and also how the machine version of that works. But it's just, to me at least, reading the research like that, all those ideas feel very nascent, and we have a lot of work to do to try to figure that out.
Do you have a sense for how LLMs are at Theory of Mind today? Or do you have a sense where the limitations are? You like to talk to them a lot. Are there any particular things that are particularly surprising to you as you do?
Yeah, I would say generally they're really good. And so like one of the more I find one of the more fascinating ways to work with language models is actually have them create personas. And then basically have, well, actually, so the way I like Socratic dialogues. I like when things are argued out in like a Socratic dialogue. And so tell any advanced LLM today to create a Socratic dialogue, and it'll either make up the personas. You can tell it what it is. It does a good job. It has this very, very annoying property, which is it wants everybody to be happy, and so it wants all of its personas to agree. And so by default, it will have a briefly interesting discussion, and then it will sort of figure out. Basically, like you're watching, I don't know, a PBS special or something, it'll kind of figure out how to bring everybody into agreement, and everybody's happy at the end of the discussion. And of course, I fucking hate that. Like, it drives me nuts. I don't want that. So instead, I tell it, I'm like, make the conversation more tense, right? And like fraught with like anger and like, people, going to get like increasingly upset throughout the conversation. And then it starts to get really interesting. And then I tell it, bring it, introduce a lot more cursing, really have them go at it. Like all the gloves come off. They're going for full, reputational destruction of each other.
You do a lot of these skits.
Yeah, skits. And then I get carried away, and then I'm like, it turns out they're all like secret ninjas, and then they all start fighting, and you've got Einstein, hitting, Niels Bohr with nunchucks, and by the way, it's happy to do that too. So you have to control yourself, but it is very good at theory of mind. And then I'll give you another example. There's a startup actually in the UK in the world of politics, and what they found is that they found that language models now are good enough. So specifically for politics, which is sort of a subcategory where this idea matters. So in politics, people do focus groups of voters all the time, and by the way, many businesses also do that. So you get a bunch of people together from different backgrounds in a room, and you kind of guide them through discussion and try to get their points of view on things. And focus groups are often surprising. Like politicians, if you talk to politicians who do focus groups, they're often surprising. They're often surprised by the things that they thought voters cared about is actually not the things that voters care about, and so you can actually learn a lot by doing this. But focus groups are very expensive to run, and then there's a long lag time because they have to be actually physically organized, and you have to recruit people and vet people and so forth. And so it turns out that the state-of-the-art models now are good enough at this that they can correctly, accurately reproduce a focus group of real people inside the model. So they're good enough to clear that bar. In other words, you can basically have a focus group actually happening in the model where you create personas in the model, and then it actually accurately represents, a college student from, Kentucky as contrasted to a housewife from Tennessee as contrasted to a, whatever. You just like specify this, and so they're good enough to clear that bar, and we'll see how far they get.
I want to segue to the bubble conversation. Amin and G2, Jensen and Matt spoke about the enormous scale of physical infrastructure being built out. AI capex is 1% of GDP. How should we understand and think about this bubble question?
Well, I think the fact that it's a question means we're not in a bubble. That's the first thing to understand. I mean, a bubble is a psychological phenomenon as much as anything. And in order to get to a bubble, everybody has to believe it's not a bubble. That's sort of the core mechanic of it. And we call that capitulation. Everybody just gives up, like, okay, I'm not going to short these stocks anymore. I'm tired of losing all my money. I'm going to go long. And we saw that actually in, and a little bit of question, like, really, what was the tech bubble? But in the kind of .com era, right as the prices went through the roof, Warren Buffett started investing in tech. So and he swore he would never invest in tech because he didn't understand it. And so if he capitulated, nobody was saying it was a bubble when it became like a quote unquote bubble. Now, if you look at that phenomenon, the internet clearly was not a bubble. It was a real thing. It was, in the short term, there was a kind of price dislocation that happened because the market, there were just not enough people on the network to make those products go at the time. And then the prices kind of outran the market. In AI, it's much harder to see that because there's so much demand in the short term, right? Like, we don't have a demand problem right now. And like, the idea that we're going to have a demand problem 5 years from now, to me, seems quite absurd. Could there be like weird bottlenecks that appear, like we just, at some point, we just don't have enough cooling or something like that? Maybe, but like right now, if you look at demand and supply and what's going on and multiples against growth, it doesn't look like a bubble at all to me. But I don't know. Do you think it's a bubble, Mark?
Yeah, look, I would just say this. Yeah, like nobody knows. So nobody knows in the sense of like the experts. Like if you're talking to anybody at like a hedge fund or a bank or whatever, like they definitely don't know. Generally, the CEOs don't know. So
But by the way, a lot of VCs don't know. They just get upset. Like VCs get like emotionally upset when you guys have higher valuations. Like it makes them like angry, and I get it all the time, and I'm like, what are you mad about? Like, the shit is working, man. Be happy. Come on. But so like, there's a lot of emotion around like people wanting it to be a bubble.
Yeah, nothing's worse than passing on a deal and then having the company become a great success. Like it's just
Yeah, it's like that valuation's outrageous.
You could be furious about that for 30 years in our business. It's amazing. And you can find, you come up with all kinds of reasons to cope and explain why it wasn't your mistake. But it's the world. It's the world that's wrong, not me, right? So. There's a lot of that. So I would just say, like I would always say, bring the conversation back to ground truth fundamentals, and the two big ground truth fundamentals are: number one, does the technology actually work? Can it deliver on its promise? And then number two, is our customers paying for it? And if those two things are true, then it's very hard to like, as long as those two things stay grounded, generally things are gonna be on track.
Yeah. When Gavin was up here with DG, he said ChatGPT was a Pearl Harbor moment for Google, the moment when the giant wakes up. When we look at history and platform shifts, what determined whether the incumbent actually wins the next wave versus new entrants? Or how should we think about that in AI?
Well, reacting to it is important, but that doesn't mean it's a Pearl Harbor moment. I think Google got their head out of their ass. That was the sound of it. So they're not going to get completely run over, but nonetheless, like, I don't think OpenAI is going away. So like they definitely let that happen. Some of it is speed, and then just look, it's execution over a long period of time. And some of these very large companies, to varying degrees, have lost their ability to execute. And so if you're talking about a brand new platform and you're talking about, kind of building for a long time, it's like, Microsoft got caught with their pants down on Google. Microsoft's still like very strong, but they missed that whole opportunity. They also missed the opportunity, Apple was nothing. And Microsoft fully believed that they were going to own mobile computing. They completely missed that one. But they were still so big from their Windows monopoly, they could build into other things. So, I think generally the new companies have won the new markets. And that doesn't mean the biggest companies, the biggest monopolies from the prior generation just last a long time, is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I also think we don't quite know, like, it's all happened so fast. We actually don't, I think we don't yet know the shape and form of the ultimate products.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, because it's tempting, and this is kind of what always happens. It's kind of tempting to look at. I'm not saying that's what these guys did on stage, but it's kind of tempting to look. Sometimes you hear the kind of reductive version of this, which is basically it's like, oh, there's either going to be a chatbot or a search engine, right? The competition is between a chatbot and a search engine, and the problem Google has is the classic problem of disruption. Are you going to disrupt the 10 blue links model and swap in add AI answers and potentially disrupt the advertising model? And then the problem OpenAI has is they have the full chat product, but they don't have the advertising yet. and they don't have the distribution, Google scale distribution. And so, you kind of say, okay, that's a fairly like that'd be straight out of the innovator's dilemma, business textbook. Like this is just a very clear, one versus one, kind of dynamic. But that assumes that, or the mistake that you could make in thinking that way is that assumes that the forms of the product in 5, 10, 15, 20 years that are going to be the main things that people use are going to be either a search engine or a chatbot, right? There's just obvious historical analogies. One just obvious historical analogy is, the personal computer from sort of invention in 1975 through to, basically 1992. Was a text prompt system, right? And at the time, by the way, an interactive text prompt was a big advance over the previous generation of like punch card systems, time sharing systems. And then, it was, 1992, so it was what, 17 years in, the whole industry took a left turn into GUIs and never looked back. And then by the way, 5 years after that, the industry took a left turn into web browsers and never looked back, right? And so the very shape and form and nature of the user experience and how it fits into our lives, is I think still unformed. And so, look, I'm sure there will be chatbots 20 years from now, but I'm pretty confident that both the current chatbot companies and many new companies are going to figure out many kinds of user experiences that are radically different that we don't even know yet. And by the way, that's one of the things, of course, that keeps the tech industry fun, which is, it's especially on the software side, it's not obvious what the shape and form of the products are, and I think there's just tremendous headroom for invention.
As you're coaching entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs in this room, what else feels different about this era, or other advice that you find yourself to spend, whether it's around sort of the talent wars that are going on, or other aspects that feel unique to this era? What other advice do you want to be leaving our entrepreneurs with?
That's unique to this era? Well, like I actually think you said the right thing, which is this is a unique era. And so trying to learn the organizational design lessons of the past, or trying to learn kind of too much from the last generation can be deceptive, because things really are different. Like the way the way your companies are getting built is quite different in many aspects, and the types of just like our observation on like PhD AI researchers is just very different than like a traditional engineer, full stack engineer, or something like that. So. I think you do have to think through a lot of things from first principles, because it is different. And observing from the outside, it's really different.
Yeah, and I would just offer, I do think things are going to change. So I already talked about, I think the shape and form of products is going to change. And so, I think there's still a lot of creativity there. I also think, and I think that, in a world of supply and demand, the thing that creates gluts is shortages, right? So when something becomes too scarce, there becomes a massive economic incentive to figure out how to unlock new supply. And so the current generation of AI companies are really struggling with particular shortages of the really talented AI researchers and engineers, and then they're really challenged with a shortage of infrastructure capacity, chips and data centers and power. I don't want to call timing on this. There will come a time when both of those things become gluts, and so I don't know that we can plan for that. Although I would just say the following: number one, the researcher engineer side of things, it is striking It is striking to the degree to which there are excellent, outstanding models coming out of China now, for multiple companies, and specifically, DeepSeek and Quen and Kimi. It is striking how the teams that are making those are not, the name brand. For the most part, these are not like the name brand people with their names on all the papers. And so, China is successfully decoding how to basically take young people and train them up in the field.
Well, and XAI to a large extent too.
Yeah, and so I think there's going to be, and look, it makes sense up until it makes sense that for a while it's going to be the super esoteric skill set and people are going to pay through the nose for it. But there's no question the information is being transferred into the environment. People are learning how to do this. College kids are figuring it out. And so, there's, and I don't know that there's ever going to be a talent glut per se, but I think for sure there's going to be a lot more people in the future who, of course, know how to build these things. And then, by the way, also, of course, AI building AI, right? So the tools themselves are going to be better at contributing to that. And so, And I think this is good because I think that the current level of shortage of engineers and researchers is too constraining. And then on the chip side, I don't want to. I'm not a chip guy, and I don't want to call it specifically, but like it's never been the case. It's never been the case in the chip industry that there's ever every shortage in the chip industry has always resulted in a glut because the profit pool of a shortage, the margins get too big, the incentive for other people to come in and figure out how to commoditize the function get too big, and so NVIDIA has the best position probably anybody's ever had in chips, but notwithstanding that, I find it hard to believe that there's going to be this level of pressure on infrastructure in 5 years.
Yeah, and even if the bottleneck within the infrastructure moves, so if it becomes power, if it becomes cooling or anything else, then you'll have a chip glut for sure, yeah.
Right. So I think I would just say this, it's likely the challenges that we all have in 5 years from now are going to be different challenges.
Yeah. Like don't definitely this industry of all industries, don't look at us as static. Like, the positions could change very, very fast.
Let's actually close on more of this macro note. Mark, you mentioned China. Last month we were in DC, and one of the big questions that Senator has is how should we make sense of sort of the state of the AI race vis-a-vis China? Do you want to share just the high level summary of what you shared with them?
Yeah, so my sense of things, and I think the current, if you just observe currently, specifically like DeepSeek, Quantum Chemie, and these models coming out of China, my sense basically is, like, I would say the U.S. specifically in the West generally, but more and more specifically the U.S. Is like the conceptual innovations are have been coming out of the U.S., coming out of the West, kind of the big kind of conceptual breakthroughs. China is extremely good at picking up ideas and implementing them and scaling them and commoditizing them, and they do that obviously throughout the manufacturing world, and they're doing it now very, I think, successfully, sort of in AI. And so I would say they're running the catch-up game like really well, and then there's sort of always this question of like how much of that is like being done, let's just say like or authentically, through hard work and smart people, and then how much is being done with maybe a little bit of help, maybe a little USB stick in the middle of the night, kind of help. There's always a little bit of a question, but like either way, they're doing a great job. Obviously, they aspire to more than that. And there are many very smart and creative people in China, and so it will be interesting now to see the level to which the conceptual breakthroughs start to come from there, and whether they pull ahead. But like I would say, like what we tell people in Washington is like, look, this is a full-on race. It's a foot race. It's a game of inches. Like we're not going to have a 5-year lead. We're going to have like maybe a 6-month lead. Like we have to run fast. We have to win. Like we have to do this. We can't, and then we can't put constraints on our companies that the Chinese government isn't putting on their own companies. And so, we'll just lose. And do you really want to wake up in the morning and live in a world really controlled and run by Chinese AI? Most of us would say no. We don't want to live in that world, and so there's that. And I would say I feel moderately good about that, just because I think we're really good at software. The minute this goes into embodied AI in the form of robotics, I think things get a lot scarier. And this is the thing I'm now spending time in DC trying to really educate people on, which is because the U.S. and the West have chosen to deindustrialize to the extent that we have over the last 40 years, China specifically now has this giant industrial ecosystem for building, sort of mechanical, electrical, and semiconductor, and now software, devices of all kinds, including phones and drones and cars, and robots. And so, there's going to be a phase 2 to the AI revolution. It's going to be robotics. It's going to happen, pretty quickly here, I think. And when it does, like even if the U.S. stays ahead in software, like the robot's got to get built, and that's not an easy thing. And it's not just like a company that does that. It's got to be an entire ecosystem. And it's going to be, the car industry was not 3 car companies. It was thousands and thousands of component suppliers building all the parts. And it's been the same thing for airplanes and the same thing for computers and everything else. It's going to be the same thing for robotics. And by default, sitting here today, that's all going to happen in China. And so even if they never quite catch us in software, they might just like lap us in hardware, and that'll be that. The good news is I think there's a growing awareness I would say, across the political spectrum in the U.S. that like deindustrialization went too far, and there's a growing desire to kind of figure out how to reverse that. I'd say I'm guardedly optimistic that we'll be making progress on that, but I think there's a lot of work to be done.
On that call to arms, let's wrap. Thank you, Mark and Ben. To wrap up, I'd like to welcome Jennifer.
Thank you.
Back to
Thank you, everybody.